Y'all, can I tell you about these Tecovas boots? I don't know if y'all know this, but these boots are handmade, high quality, stylish, and comfortable right out of the box. I know we buy everything online these days, but boots are something you really should get fitted for. And it just so happens Tecovas is based right here in Austin. So come shop with me at the Tecovas store on South Congress or the Domain. That's TECOVAS.com. Don't go gently, y'all. Today on CityCast Austin, we're starting with a warning. This episode may bring back some really hard memories and tough feelings. As we head into what's likely to be another record-breaking summer, many Austinites are keeping a nervous eye on the state's power grid. We were not like this before that winter storm in 2021 knocked out power for millions of Texans, leaving lots of us in the dark and freezing cold for days. So, is our anxiety justified, or can we chill out a bit when it comes to power this summer? We'll get into all of it with my guest today, Mose Buchele, KUT's energy reporter. CityCast Austin is brought to you by our exclusive launch sponsor, Tecovas. It's Wednesday, June 26th. I'm Nikki Dufon, and this is what Austin's talking about. I'm here with Mose Buchele, who is a senior correspondent for KUT covering energy and environment. He's been there since 2009. He has a podcast called The Disconnect that digs deep into Texas's power grid. Hi, Mose. How are you?
I'm doing great, Nikki. Thanks.
Thank you so much for being here. So ever since that big blackout, whenever we go into summer or winter months, I know I'm not the only one who asks myself this. Is there a chance of another power failure? Now, as someone who reports on this, how are you feeling about the power grid going into the summer?
Going into this summer, I think it's safe to say that the odds of of rolling blackouts, and I've heard grid managers say the same thing, are probably about as high as they were last summer. The most recent monthly assessment produced by the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, the group that operates the Texas power grid, puts the risk of rolling blackouts at about 12% in August, like in the dog days of summer, I think that people would prefer it wasn't quite that high. I guess the thing to remember is even if it happens, what we're most likely talking about, and again, that's only if it happens, is a situation where the grid doesn't have enough energy supply to meet demand for, a couple hours, probably in the mid to late evening, and it needs to rotate power outages around the state in order to kind of balance supply and demand on the grid. This is the way it's supposed to work. It's not pleasant for anybody, but it's not. But rolling outages, as they call them, are supposed to be managed in such a way to spread the pain around so that nobody feels it too acutely, and then eventually, like, the power supply comes back on and we can all go to bed.
We recently saw three totally different headlines all about the power grid all on one day this week. And it was like, one said, "We are prepared." And the ERCOT CEO shared summer 2024 power grid outlook.
Right.
Another one said, "Texas power grid faces similar risks this summer to last summer."
Yep.
And then another one said, "ERCOT warns of tight power grid conditions this summer." And they put in quotes, "It's a little nerve-wracking."
Yeah.
So, so like, out the gate, let's talk about this like summer blackouts and all these confusing back and forth headlines about the power grid.
Yeah. It really is confusing. I mean, if you don't know the background of this and what they're talking about, it does seem completely contradictory, and it is. To some level, it's just a matter of framing. ERCOT has said many times that they are prepared to tackle the challenges of high summer demand this year. They have also said in their assessments that there is at least a 12% chance of rolling blackouts in August. And so I think that if you were to really kind of drill down, they might even, and I don't want to speak for them, but they may say, well, rolling blackouts are part of, tackling the challenges presented by the grid. There are a lot of new challenges confronting people that operate the power grid, even as some of the older threats are not as acute. So So let's take a look at that middle. I think it was the middle headline that you mentioned.
Yeah, power grid faces similar risks. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So what I've heard officials say is that it's almost about a similar chance of a rolling blackout this year as last. But what is different this year is 100 other things. So last summer, if you remember, was the second hottest summer in Texas history.
Yep.
The weather was brutally hot in Austin. That drives up energy demand in a major way. And so last summer we ran an extremely high risk of having an energy emergency. And last year we received 11 requests for conservation from ERCOT, from the grid operator, because of those tight supplies. And last year, we also officially entered into an energy emergency alert once, and that happened in September. So to say that the risk this year is the same as last year is not necessarily comforting when you consider all those things, right?
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't make you feel good.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. And it's especially not comforting when you realize it's not likely to be as hot this summer. It's going to be very hot in Texas this summer and in Austin this summer, but it is also not likely to be as hot as last year. Last year was insanely hot. And so if we're running the same risk of rolling outages this summer as we are last summer, but it's not going to be as hot, well, then what's going on there? That's really not good news, is it? The answer to that really is increased demand. More and more people are coming to Texas to use electricity. There's a lot that's driving demand. The oil and gas extraction and processing, it takes a lot of energy. There's all sorts of industrial and commercial use on top of just all the people here and residential energy use. But what the grid operator is saying now is that they're expecting energy demand potentially to double in the state of Texas in the next 6 years. And they are saying a lot of that falls on the shoulders of data centers. So these could be crypto mining operations, which we've heard about before, and are increasingly artificial intelligence data centers. These are just like the kind of big rooms where they have the servers and all the computers and all the physical hardware that supports artificial intelligence systems. And that takes a lot of energy, and that's one thing that they're worried about.
This is really scary because, so let's back up for a second. So we had the Winter Storm Uri in February of 2021. Texans were in the dark for days, traumatizing. It was deadly, dangerous. What is your February 2021 story? What happened to you?
February 2021 is when that big statewide blackout hit, right? And everybody who was there or here in that time has a story about it. I live in East Austin. I was actually on a voluntary furlough from work. I was here at home, and initially, when I saw the snow coming down the night before, I was very excited. I'm originally from the Northeast, and of course, by like midday Monday, it became very clear that this was actually a very, very big deal. This is a very bad thing that was happening in the state. We woke up without power on Monday morning, as many people did. And after a night here without power, we were fortunate enough to get moved by my radio station, KUT, into a hotel near the station so that I could wake up and come in and do the reporting that I needed to do. We were also like kind of shuffling my in-laws around town. It was quite something, like you were driving around these ice-slicked roads, watching water lines burst and spew water all over the place, seeing people with no power, lining up outside of pharmacies or what grocery stores were open. It was a lesson in how very quickly everything can just collapse around you when some of these basic necessities aren't met. And so that after that, have spent much of my time in the years since looking at the power grid and all these related issues.
That's when people really became, I think, That's when people really realized what ERCOT was. It turned all of the attention to the Texas power grid and how to avoid these outages ever again. Meanwhile, to your point, more people are moving to Texas. That you've got all the tech companies and all of
Mm-hmm.
the pull on the strain on the grid, and it's like, and we're encouraging it clearly. What has the state done since 2021 to make sure to like shore up the electrical grid for all these new and existing Texas? Like, what have they done to prepare for this?
There's what they've done, and then there's also what's actually happened. They changed the way, there were like kind of administrative changes, the way that ERCOT works and some of that stuff. They changed the way that different agencies communicate with each other in an emergency response capacity. But if you're going to like kind of generalize what our state officials really focused on was trying to increase the construction of natural gas power plants in Texas. And this is not a surprise. I mean, our state leadership are almost all big fans of Texas oil and gas industry, and they view natural gas power plants as a dispatchable source of energy to bolster the power grid that also, I think, has the benefit for them of sending business to this sector that is a powerful political sector, important economic force in the state, and also donates a ton of money to their election campaigns. So like
Right.
the focus was on building new power plants. Once these power plants are built, they can provide extra energy when it's needed, and essentially it decreases the likelihood of a blackout. Many people point out that it's bad for the environment. What they're doing is kind of setting up an infrastructure dependent on natural gas in a time when most policymakers around the world and certainly climate scientists are saying that we should not be investing in more fossil fuel infrastructure. We need to get off of that precisely because it's fossil fuel emissions that are driving these crazy weather events that are the very same thing that lead us to blackouts. But even if you put all that aside, it takes years to do it. Right. And so, building a new natural gas power plant and incentivizing and subsidizing its construction, which is one of the solutions they ultimately came to, is not something that is going to help us this year. Right. And so
exactly.
So that's one of the things they did. What happened was that renewable energy continued to grow at a breathtaking clip in Texas. We saw solar farms going into the state at a record-breaking rate. We're surpassing even California in by certain metrics when it comes to solar power. We consistently break records in the state when it comes to the share of the power on our grid that comes from renewable energy. It's an indispensable part of our energy mix. We also saw the arrival in very dramatic fashion of a whole fleet of energy storage facilities. These are big batteries that plug into the energy grid that can discharge power again in those moments when the grid starts to get a little bit shaky. So these systems came online and kind of helped, along with our traditional generating fleet, to balance out demand and get us through without blackouts last year. And so that's the kind of other part of this equation.
Can you tell me just really quickly these power banks? Can you just give me like a second grade like definition of essentially, like, what is that?
I went up to East Texas to an energy storage facility. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it a little bit, but these things look like it's like a field with a lot of what looked like shipping containers. All just kind of lined up in a field, big fence around them, and transmission lines running, to and from this facility. And in this case, it was also hooked up to a solar farm, so they could charge these batteries. And you can really think of these things as rechargeable batteries. Within these storage containers, there are rows and stacks of batteries that can, when electricity is cheap and plentiful on the grid, they can charge up, and then when we hit a time of peak demand, they will discharge onto the system to help smooth out the flow of energy and avoid any potential emergencies. And so it's really pretty impressive, because all we're talking about, Nikki, in this conversation is the anxiety that surrounds peak energy demand in the state. These are times when we're all using the most electricity and we start running low on supply. But most of the time, we have ample energy in the state. When there's so much wind power, for example, just take that as an example, or so much solar power being generated that you can sell it for nothing. Well, why not use it to charge up these big batteries and then save it for these moments when suddenly conditions become tighter?
We'll be right back after this break. And we are back with Mose Buchele talking about the Texas power grid. Now, have we had any other close calls or big power outages in Austin or, close around Central Texas since February 2021?
Absolutely. The winter before last, if you lived in Austin, you'll remember we had another devastating power outage. And this one was caused by an ice storm that kind of swept through Central Texas and knocked out power lines locally.
Right.
And the result of that was that there were people once again in Austin who went days and days and days without power. It was very upsetting. It was very dangerous. And for the people that lived through that, it was a very similar experience for them to that grid-wide outage that they had experienced in 2021. The difference was that one was a local event, the other was a statewide event that happened because the entire energy system of the state, run by ERCOT, fell short of power to meet demand. What happened was that this serious ice storm blew through, deposited tons of ice on trees all across the region, and those trees became overweighted and their branches fell, or sometimes the trees themselves just fell and crashed onto power lines.
I remember that. I worked for the city during then. It was really kind of terrible. It was bad.
Absolutely. So again, it took days and days and days for Austin Energy to restore power to many people. There had actually been a real push in Austin several years previous to not be as aggressive with tree trimming because people don't like that. It hurts the trees. It looks like crap, when you're going down the street and you see a tree that looks all cut up and chopped up. And the utility appears to have kind of, for some years, taken a step back from that. And then after this outage, again, they kind of went in the other direction. They said, we have to catch up on our tree trimming. We have to take this much more seriously. They're still trying to kind of catch up.
They absolutely are.
And, another really wild thing about that event, that outage, was I was, out reporting and wandering around these neighborhoods where there's power out. And there'd be houses that had generators hooked up to them. And almost inevitably, if you ask the person, when did you buy this generator? They'd tell you, I got it after the last big blackout.
Right.
So like in a weird way, like that local outage, like vindicated and reinforced people's anxiety around the stability of their energy system, right? More and more people are doing this, going out and just trying to do it, get themselves set up so they can protect at least their own house, because they think that these things are kind of just a part of life in Texas now.
Speaking of generators, the state added disaster survival supplies like generators to tax-free holidays. Are you seeing many people in Austin installing generators? Are generators our best hope?
For any of those people who you talked to during that last Austin blackout, whose generator came in to provide them with power, it worked. And these are obviously, it goes without saying, this is only an option for people that can afford it. Even though it's completely understandable, I worry about the implications of everybody deciding that they have to go it alone when it comes to their own energy needs, because it reduces the sense of electricity and a shared power grid as a public service and a community good.
Actually, that makes a lot of sense.
And the more you create a system where those with means can protect themselves against energy uncertainty,
Mm,
the more you probably create a political dynamic
that's a
where
good point.
the power grid and the kind of community infrastructure falls by the wayside. And so, and again, I'm not even saying I would never buy a generator myself. I completely understand why people would do that. But another big part of this that we don't talk about nearly as much is the demand side and increasing energy efficiency, which we're not good at doing in Texas. And Austin is a little bit better, actually. I think we could all do a lot better in using less power, and that would also really, really help stabilize and strengthen our power grid and avoid blackouts.
So speaking of conserving, like what are your tips for conserving?
Yeah, sure. Conservation is that moment when perhaps ERCOT or Austin Energy goes to you and says, "Hey, would you mind actually like not having your AC at 72, but maybe put it up to 75 because there's not a lot of electricity available." Or conservation is when you leave the room and turn off the light in the room you leave. I mean, that's a very simple example of it, right? You want to conserve power.
It reminds me of when my grandma my grandma used to come through the house and yell at us and be like, "Turn all these lights off."
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
use daylight. It's sunny outside. Why do you have
Absolutely,
lights
yeah.
on?
She was right.
She
Yeah,
just opened
like
all
why?
the curtains.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Do other states have to deal with the same kind of stuff? Like, are their grids handled in the same kind of way as ours?
The short answer is no, most of them don't. I mean, Texas is the only state with its own power grid. And the ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas power grid, I think it serves about 90% of the population of the state. There are some parts of Texas that aren't covered by ERCOT, but it's most of it. And other states have grids that cross state borders so that there is an ability to share energy across state lines that doesn't exist here in Texas. It is an experience very unique to just a few places and increasingly just to Texas.
So what should we be keeping an eye on this summer? If we want to know how the grid is doing, or like kind of along the lines of keeping the anxiety at bay, where should we go? Where should we keep an eye on?
So, I mean, there are things you can very easily look at to see the state of the energy grid, and also, go to Austin Energy's website and see what's going on with power outages locally. So, in terms of the power grid writ large across the state, you can go to the ERCOT website, and there are real-time graphs and monitors that show you how energy supply is versus demand.
Oh, wow.
And as long as there's a good cushion of supply to meet all the demand, well, the grid should be in fine shape. Usually we had our highest peak demand in the summer when everybody got home from work and turned on their air conditioning. And you'd see this huge spike in demand. What grid operators are now saying at ERCOT is that the time where an energy emergency may be more likely would be a time a little later in the day. Here's what it would look like. It would be a day when a lot of natural gas power plants are offline. They're not working because they need repairs. And on this day, these natural gas power plants that are offline, or perhaps nuclear plants or other what they call thermal plants, are likely they're offline unexpectedly. So suddenly you don't have this energy generation capacity that you thought you would have. So that's the first factor in a potential energy emergency. Then you have extremely hot weather. So we're going to have to, again, imagine a condition like, 105 degrees in the middle of August, which is, again, completely likely. That could very easily happen.
It's a Wednesday in August.
Yeah, exactly. Then you need to imagine a condition where basically the sun sets and then there's not as much wind coming up to meet that deficit. That is like the hour where they say that we're most likely to have a problem. And so that's what to look for.
So the perfect storm.
Yeah. It takes a lot of, like super high energy demand and all these different sources of electricity that we have in the state
Not working
all at once.
Okay.
Yeah.
for some reason, that makes me feel a little better, but
Yeah.
I'll keep my optimism at bay. Is there anything else you want to add about the Texas Power Grid?
Well, just that it's always the thing you don't expect, right? I mean, like we just painted this picture of like how this could happen if it does, not to freak people out, not saying it will.
Yeah.
There's always an unknown. There are all sorts of other things. And so that's what we keep an eye on.
I just want to remind everybody that Mose has a podcast. It's called The Disconnect.
Yeah.
And you can understand this issue better. And he breaks it down on his podcast because you have educated me today.
Oh, great. Well, I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being here and talking to me today.
I really enjoyed it. And I'm sorry if I talk too much, but I get excited about this stuff.
That's all for today here on CityCast Austin. You'll find links to Mose's reporting in our show notes. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Austin newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye, y'all.